I'm going to sit. I'm not. I learned how to speak in Narcotics Anonymous meetings in a chair, so that's how I'm most comfortable. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's involved in putting this thing together and being of service today. And also, I'd like to thank everyone for not only being here, but inviting me to participate. I'm very stream of consciousness, so I don't know exactly where I'm going to wind up. But I do know that the traditions have always been an important part in my recovery and my life. And when I was first asked to share today, the minute he said tradition 4, the first thing that went through my mind was, all right, because that's a controversial tradition, and I'm all about being in the middle of controversy, right? So I don't want something that's really nice and safe and generic. I want to be like somewhere where I can say something to make you think and then start a conversation, whether I believe it or not. Sometimes I'll do that, you know what I mean? So at first, that's what my first thought was, and then I started to process through it, and I'm just going to read it real quick to keep myself focused. Tradition 4, each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or NA as a whole. And the reason that I say that it's one of the controversial traditions is when the book was first written and it went through approval process and everything, there was some language in the fourth tradition that got taken out by individuals without a group conscience. And as we heard, group conscience is vital to the welfare of our fellowship. And so later they put the language back in, and they started selling the books, and then they changed it again without a group conscience and blah blah blah. So the fourth tradition has had a storied past, and you should attend some history workshops and learn all about that. I don't really think that I want to get into that. I'd rather focus on the meaning of the fourth tradition as I understand it. And I see this tradition as being one of them that's manipulated a lot, because it has that comma in there, you know what I mean? And everyone reads that each group's autonomous, and then they stop, right? And what I've learned is that autonomy in the context of the traditions means that we're autonomous in our groups through a group conscience to determine how best to carry out our primary purpose. And if you think about the traditions, they're like, they say in there that they're not negotiable, right? They say that true spiritual principles are never in conflict, right? When they talk about the steps, they're suggestions. There are no musts. But in the traditions, they're clear cut. They say things like ought. There's no getting around. When you tell somebody they ought to do something, they better do it, right? So the traditions are much more rigid than the steps. Because your personal recovery, like Kathy was talking about, you don't have to take that suggestion. Eventually, we all know you're going to, because the pain of living without that suggestion is unbearable at times. But you don't have to. You can stay here for years without taking any suggestions. But the groups don't have that luxury, because the groups have to follow a set of guidelines to ensure that Narcotics Anonymous is vital and thrives. Because without Narcotics Anonymous, none of us have a shot. Without Narcotics Anonymous, people that have never heard of this place or know that they have a problem with the way that they're living their lives have any chance of hope for a better way of life. And that's what the traditions ensure. The traditions ensure that NA is vibrant. And, you know, a lot of things are talked about, different ways of combating addiction and what have you, but Narcotics Anonymous is the only proven method for making a difference in the lives of addicts. So it's very important for me to make sure that traditions are followed, because everything I ever learned in my entire life I learned in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And so when I think about traditions, I don't think that they're individual. I think they're all intermingled, and that we cannot be autonomous without practicing a group conscience. How else do we know what way we want to structure our meetings? Do we just, whoever got elected chairperson gets to pick the format this month? Doesn't work that way. So we have to believe that there's a guiding force that wants us to do the next right thing for the next right reason, and that's achieved through using the second tradition. But there's others. You know, if our groups all had different purposes, there'd be no unity, right? If this group over here wanted to help us stop using, but they wanted us to do it chemically, and this one over here wanted us to do it through spiritual methods, and this one wanted to do it a different way, then there's no unity. So the first tradition's important in making sure that our autonomy is consistent. And then you have to remember too, like we just heard about the third tradition, that we don't put any distinctions on who can come into our meetings, right? As long as they have a desire to be there, they're welcome, whether they're high or not, whether they're sleeping through the entire meeting. Because the purpose of autonomy in the context of Narcotics Anonymous is to have a place that the message is carried in a safe atmosphere. The safety of recovering addicts is paramount to the fourth tradition. Without providing a place where addicts feel comfortable and not judged and safe and whatever else it is that happens to addicts when they're not in Narcotics Anonymous meetings, when we eliminate all of those other things, and they're allowed to be themselves in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, then we allow ourselves to let down our walls and be who we really were meant to be, and start to engage in that recovery process. The traditions allow us to get past all of that so that recovery can happen, because that, in essence, is what we've always been taught is what happens at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, is recovery. But if we have all these other outside influences, then recovery gets blocked. So we have to be safe for every person who's in there, regardless of whether they all look alike, talk alike, smell alike, whatever. Everybody's entitled to a safe place. And so, you know, you have the third tradition, you have the fifth tradition that ensures that no matter what NA meeting you go to throughout the world, the message is always the same, right? So the autonomy allows you to pick how you present that message, but it doesn't allow you to change the message. It doesn't allow you to tell people how they can and cannot share. It doesn't allow you to say that we're going to read this literature but not that literature. It doesn't allow any of that. You're autonomous to provide a safe place, and you're autonomous in allowing yourself some leeway because you best know the way your community understands the message of Narcotics Anonymous, but you're not allowed to change the message of Narcotics Anonymous, because without that, we have nothing. That's the one and only constant throughout every meeting in the world, is that that message is consistent. And And I've been asked by the next guy not to even talk about the fifth tradition, so I'll stop it there. But I believe that they're all intermingled, right? And without getting long and drawn out, the most important tradition in all of them is our anonymity, because it goes throughout all of the other traditions, right? And what it means in relationship to autonomy is that just because you have a really big meeting and I have a really small meeting, your meeting doesn't have any more of a voice than my meeting. Just because your meeting's been here since 1980 and mine started last week doesn't mean that your meeting's better than my meeting. They're all equal, and it's important to remember that anonymity in context autonomy allows people to just pick up a meeting list and not have to judge which meeting can I go to. It also allows us not to judge other meetings and say, well, don't go to that meeting because, you know, they spend all their group donations on pizza or whatever it is that they're doing, right? So you don't get to pick and choose what are good and bad meetings because they're colored by your personal experiences, right? And so autonomy allows that group to entice people to come to their meeting through pizza if they choose, right? And if it gets one person into the seat that never heard about Narcotics Anonymous and makes a difference in their life, then who are we to say that it was wrong, right? So the anonymity in relationship to allowing groups to be who they are is very important. And you know, some groups like to read out of literature. Other groups like to have speakers. Other groups like to have open discussions. Some groups like to have it where everybody gets to share 10 times. If that's not your flavor, don't go there, right? But somebody likes it. So you're allowed to do all that as long as you're talking about the principles that have been developed through Narcotics Anonymous. I think the one of the big things about autonomy is that it allows all of us individually to become a part of Narcotics Anonymous. And the biggest thing about Narcotics Anonymous is that fellowship, right? It's the community. It's that being able to walk into a place, whether it's in the same neighborhood you spent your entire life, or if it's in Bora Bora across the world and you're on vacation and you walk into a meeting and you can look somebody in the eye, and when you're talking about the pain of active addiction, you see it in their eyes that they can relate to you. Without that, there is no recovery. And autonomy allows us to focus on that message instead of everything else. And being a part of something is what I've always searched for my entire life, right? The whole time when I was growing up, I tried this, that, the other thing until I finally found drugs, and that's what let me, you know, fit in everywhere. And then I came into Narcotics Anonymous and I was back with everybody who was doing the same thing, trying to fit in, being desperate to be accepted somewhere. And autonomy allowed me to become a part of Narcotics Anonymous instead of having to follow certain rules that I was incapable of following. I was such a nonconformist that when I first got clean, you know, people were just like freaked out by me, right? And Narcotics Anonymous gave me a safe place long enough that I could find out who I really was and become that person. So being a part of is vital to the survival of Narcotics Anonymous. And another part of this tradition has to do with responsibility, right? In our personal lives, as we work steps, we become responsible and we pay consequences for our decisions, right? We make good choices, we get nice rewards. we do some messed up stuff, we got to pay the price for doing that stuff, right? And so a group also has to take responsibility for their actions. A group that chooses to keep all their seventh tradition because they want to throw a big New Year's Eve party or whatever, right? Then they have to be responsible when they go to area and there's no literature to be bought because they've diverted their primary purpose, right? A group's primary purpose is not necessarily to have a big party. If you want to do that kind of thing, I guess your group conscience can discuss how best to do that, but there's consequences for actions that are taken on by groups. And groups are also responsible for the way that their members behave. If you have a group and everybody's in and out of the facility and they're outside causing a disturbance in their neighborhood, they're not a good neighbor. And then the people in the neighborhood are complaining to the facility, you know, all those people, they stay in the parking lot till midnight, they're playing loud music, they're putting their cigarettes out in my grass. You know, it damages the reputation of the fellowship, right? So the group's responsible for that because that affects NA as a whole. So it's okay for you to have whatever kind of meeting you want to have, but you also have to make sure that in your meetings, when you're doing your inventory, you discuss that there's different things besides just, you know, what readings are we going to read in what order? There's different types of rules regarding your behavior, and it's important to do that. And the reason that it's important that we be good neighbors is because you never know when your meeting's going to get a newcomer, right? Some meetings go months without newcomers, some get them every week. And if that newcomer is in your neighborhood and they're struggling with active addiction and they don't know where to go, and everyone in the neighborhood thinks that Narcotics Anonymous is a place where people are destructive and hanging out in parking lots and this and that, they're not going to recommend that newcomer come to your meeting and see what it's all about. But if you leave your facility clean at the end of your meeting, if you're a good neighbor to those people in your community, if you're working with the facility that you're borrowing space from, they're going to say to people that ask them, you know, I don't know what they do there, but they seem like really nice people. Go ask them about your problem. Maybe they can help. And once a newcomer comes to Narcotics Anonymous, we know what happens, right? They're going to hear a solution to the way they've been living. So it's important that, you know, everything that occurs in our meetings is based on how can we best serve newcomers. And again, we're autonomous in how we get to pick to do that, but we're not autonomous in the ability to destroy NA's relationship in the community or its reputation. We need to be mindful of those things. And there's something in here. I don't always follow anything in order, but in the basic text it says group autonomy has been used to justify the violations of traditions. If a contradiction exists, we have slipped away from our principles. And so it's important for me to remember that when we're sitting in our business meeting and we're discussing what we want to do, and there's many strong-willed people and everybody has their opinion on what should be done, and we call it for a vote, and whatever happens, happens, and we move forward because we're honestly living in our higher power's will for us. We need to remember that if that action has put us in opposition to the rest of the fellowship, that contradiction means that we're living outside of our higher power's will for Narcotics Anonymous. We may have thought we were making the right decision, but if we're in contradiction or in conflict, will you, with the other spiritual principles of the program, we can't say, well, we're autonomous, we can do that anyhow, because we all want to do that. So we need to remind ourselves that lack of conflict is basically the goal of the traditions. And when you find yourself at odds with the fellowship, there's probably a principle that's being violated in there. And then when I was given the flyer for this event and it said grab them by the principles, I wasn't sure exactly if that meant I had to try to figure out what all the principles were from my particular tradition, and I didn't want to really try to make something that's not there, but they identified 3 of them, so I thought I'd mention them. They say that the 4th tradition has open-mindedness as one of its spiritual principles, and as I've kind of explained a little bit in my viewpoint, the open-mindedness comes about in that we're just receptive to other people's opinion. We don't allow those strong leaders who may seek to govern to tell us how we should do things. We all get together and we're open-minded to the possibility that somebody else has a better idea than we do. It talks about love being one of the spiritual principles of the 4th tradition, because it encourages us to reach out to the members of the fellowship, whether they're in our group or not, and again, be open-minded to their ideas of how we can best carry our message. And the final one was anonymity, which I pretty much thought I talked a little bit about. So those were the main spiritual principles that I was able to think about. And I just want to end with 2 things. There's a line in It Works that says, each group bears an equal responsibility for the work and reputation of NA. And that's what the 4th tradition is about, is that we may think about our individual meeting, but when we make decisions, we have to put it in the context of the entire health of Narcotics Anonymous. Because without Narcotics Anonymous, none of us have anything, and especially not a group to go to on a regular basis. And those groups are essential to the growth of Narcotics Anonymous. I think there's a line somewhere that Narcotics Anonymous groups are the most effective vehicle for carrying the message, or something like that. I'm sure that'll come out later today, but without a group that's a part of this fellowship, none of us individually have a place to go and seek recovery. And suffering addicts are seeking recovery, and it's our responsibility as members of a group to ensure that they have that when they're ready. So my throat's real dry, so I'm going to stop there. I don't know how long I talked either, but I'm glad to be here. I'm grateful again to all of you, and thanks for letting me do this.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Give Kathy and Bruce another round of applause. got